Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramesar, and I'm pleased to say my guest today is Caroline Taylor, who's the director of the upcoming Marionettes production of Les Mis, or Les Misérables.
Either one.
Caroline, welcome to the program.
Lovely to meet you.
It's one of those weird things that we've been Facebook friends for a while. All of a sudden you see the person in real life, like, oh, that's not right. Well, first of all, give us a sense of your history in directing and productions.
Well, directing is fairly new to me, and it has mainly come through Marionettes. When I was studying theatre and performance, I wasn't particularly interested in directing. I was much more interested in sort of acting and performing and that sort of thing. And the critical aspect, you know, the kind of arts administrative criticism, research, dramaturgy, that kind of thing, which all feed into directing, I think. But it was when we were doing our 2011 production of Carmen, and we tried to get a few directors that we wanted to work with, and scheduling was an issue. That, you know, nature abhors a vacuum, and they're like, well, you know, you studied this, so why don't you go do it? So this is just the second thing I'm directing now. I thought I might have started with a two-hander, The Little Carib or something, but instead it's very large operas and musicals.
You're going from nothing to the big time, as they say. Queen's
Yes,
Hall.
yeah, and with a very large, Les Mis is probably the most one of the most complicated musicals that I'm aware of, you know, because it crosses so much time, and there's so many characters and so many named characters apart from the principals. So it's very technically demanding, very demanding in terms of trying to get everything right and lining it up. So we'll see how it goes, but it's going well.
Well, I suppose to a certain extent, the fact that it is such a large and complicated production makes it a good fit for the Marionettes, because you've got a large contingent of people to work with, so you don't want to exclude as more people.
Well,
than
that's
necessary.
absolutely right, because there are probably about 30 different solos, you know, so that pretty much everybody at some point can sing by themselves or have a little featured part, and then of course since we have a strong chorus, that they're, you know, big rousing choruses, so we can use them for that as well. And we've tried to include as many people as we can, particularly from the adult chorus. The children less so, because there's less scope for children in the production, and it is kind of PG-13.
Running around as urchins, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In that sense.
But were there any other artistic reasons for choosing Les Mis?
I think
other than obviously crowd appeal, it's hugely popular worldwide.
So I mean, obviously the ability to market it and get an audience was one thing, but we've loved the music from it for a long time. I mean, it was one of the first musicals I saw as a kid in London, and just fell in love with it. You know, the stories, the individual character stories, the music, the kind of epic themes, and they're beautiful choruses, and it technically is an operetta, you know, so that it meets the kind of criteria for what the kind of stuff the Marionettes likes to do, which is kind of challenging musical stuff. So so we thought, you know, between the soloist and the chorus, and, you know, the story and the appeal, it would be something good to take on.
But I mean, even by opera standards, Les Mis is really quite over the top, isn't it? I mean, it's a very overly dramatic, in a good way. I mean, it pulls you in.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it condenses. I mean, you know, I was reading about even the creation of the musical initially, and that was a feat in itself, because it tries to condense this 3,000-page epic novel that has, you know, kind of meanders off, and, you know, talking about architecture and history and politics and all kinds of things along the way, as well as telling the story of these really kind of compelling characters in kind of minute detail. And so the translation to stage and to how you set those stories to music was fascinating to follow. And yeah, so it is very, very complex, but I think some parts of it, you kind of, even me being so familiar with it now, there are parts where I'm like, this is so kind of difficult to follow, and I've seen it a few times on stage, and it's quite, parts of it, the nuances, I'm sure, are quite difficult to follow for people, but I think the overarching themes and emotional appeal kind of win out, you know, over the details of when exactly this June Rebellion is, who's fighting, why are they fighting, who's in power at the time. Yes. You know, because I think a lot of people think it's set during the French Revolution, and it's actually not. It's set for about 20 20 years after, you know.
Which is kind of the point of it, the fact that, you know, things were changed, but they weren't really that changed for a large number of people.
Exactly. And you know, that kind of quest for human rights and justice and liberty and all those kinds of things, they're ongoing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, in many ways, I mean, it sort of transcends time, doesn't it?
Yes.
And even in the situation we find ourselves now in Trinidad and Tobago, where there's a certain level of chaos and disassociation and wrongs being committed and people feeling wronged.
Yes.
The idea of redemption and a brighter tomorrow in the midst of all of that is an important message.
Absolutely, and fighting for the tomorrow that you believe should manifest, you know, standing up for what you believe in and walking the talk, you know, that and paying it forward, you know, like Valjean, the lead character. I think one of the most moving parts about his story is that he's, you know, society's kind of jilted him a number of times and the law has not been kind to him, and but he's given an opportunity to turn his life around by the bishop early on in the prologue, and spends the rest of his days trying to pay it forward, you know, to society as a whole and to individual people. And so that story of kind of rising up and hope in the face of adversity and love winning out over hate or anger or fear, you know, it's kind of soul stirring and life affirming, and that's always nice to do. You know?
Well, I mean, nowadays anything is welcome, I guess.
Yes.
One thing that occurred to me, and we were talking a little bit before the camera started rolling, not that these cameras roll, they're video cameras, but that's beside the point. The film obviously was quite successful as well. And I was asking about your inspirations in terms of performances and stuff, and you said, well, you're not really looking at the film because that's a different medium, which certainly is true.
Yes.
But I suppose the majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago will be familiar with the story from the film. Is that a challenge? Because obviously they're totally different things.
Yeah.
One is about close-ups and things, and the other one is on stage.
Yes. I think yes and no, because we've done excerpts from Les Mis before. So I think Marionettes audiences, you know, they kind of have a sense of what to expect. And this staging will be quite different from the excerpts we've done. But, you know, it doesn't concern me too much that people have received it primarily through the film medium, because the music is still that compelling, and I think people kind of go along with, you know,
and the film obviously would have drawn, obviously, from the musical that came before it.
Yes, and I think what the film did as well was go back to some of the source material in the book, and they made some changes from the musical that then lined it up more with the book than with the musical. So it's all kind of this, you know, interesting little family tree of works, you know, so. But yeah, no, I think people will go along with what they see, you know, because I think the performers and the music that just kind of pull you in and you go with it. So.
Well, I want to talk about the cast in a moment, but in terms of the cost of a production like this, I know you're trying to. One of the reasons you chose this is a popular production, and you might be able to actually recoup your investment in it, which is important for any performance company. But the staging must be tremendously expensive.
Yes.
And the costuming.
Yes, from the you know, the set is probably the biggest cost factor. The costuming following closely on that, renting rehearsal spaces, the orchestra, all of those things they're tremendously costly. And
how many sets do you use in the production?
Oh gosh. We're actually doing a kind of hybrid at the moment. It would have been nice because one of the things we're doing is incorporating video projections.
Okay.
So because they're about like 41 pieces or something like that, or between 39 and 41 pieces, and it's
41 set pieces?
Not necessarily set pieces, because I think there are about 20 scenes or something like that between the first act and the second act.
That's still an awful lot.
It's a lot, but you know, the projections are really useful because, for example, in the prologue, I think there's something like 5 to 7 different places that Valjean goes to. You know, he's in the chain gang, then he's at the bishop, and he's at the innkeeper, and he's, you know, with the farmer laborer out in the countryside. So the projections help kind of locate the audience as we go along. And we would have actually liked to use full scale, full width projections, but Queen's Hall doesn't actually have the capacity for rear projection because they have these two.
So you've got to use film projection, which is limiting.
Exactly, because for example, the barricade, you know, if you want to have a certain kind of height with the barricade, when they're fighting over it, front projection doesn't work because it casts shadows.
Right.
So there have been all these kind of technical things that we've had to work with. But yeah, so I think, you know, we try to at least break even with the first run, and hopefully after this we'll be able to run it again. We hope. But
Well, it's the kind of thing, if you put so much time and effort into it, you might want to do a prolonged run.
Yes.
Although we don't have a tradition of that in Trinidad and Tobago, like Broadway or the West End, do we?
No, we don't. In fact,
We don't have the available spaces even.
exactly. Spaces at a premium, both rehearsal spaces and performance spaces, because, come the end of this year, we're back into a situation where we're looking for rehearsal space again. So, yeah, I mean, it would be nice to not just do it again in Queen's Hall at some point, but maybe take it around the country. But,
That's lugging a lot of sets. And
it is,
yeah.
and we have to license each performance as well, so the licensing costs are kind of prohibitive as well. So
I was being polite, and I didn't ask you about that, because I know a lot of local productions will sometimes sort of skirt that issue of licensing. But with Les Mis, it's kind of easy to spot, and people know where the production's being staged.
Well, the thing is that we've done sort of concert excerpts before and have wanted to stage the full performance for about 10 years. I remember when I was living in New York just after finishing college, back 2004, 2005, I was kind of liaising with MTI very closely, trying to get the rights to do a full production, but they were very restrictive in terms of who they would allow to do that, because I think they wanted only to give the rights to people who could do a long commercial run.
Right.
So the only rights available were for the student production, and you technically have to be 18 and under to perform in that. And we were like, well, that's not really what we want to do. So, and I was even harassing Cameron McIntosh Inc. and all those folks for years to try and get the rights to perform the full version. And it wasn't until the movie came out at the end of 2012 that they finally released amateur performance rights. So we grabbed it and said, okay, let's grab the bull by the horns and go for it. But yeah, the licensing is very expensive, as well as, there are a number of restrictions, like we can't videotape it, for example, so
Right.
no TV broadcasts or anything like that.
So you lose a possible revenue stream that way as well.
Yeah, so because we were able to do that with Carmen, we never ran it again. We did 2 weekends and didn't run it again, but it's on floor on demand, and at some point might do a kind of DVD edition kind of thing. But no opportunity for that for Les Mis, and since there are no concrete plans for doing it again, hopefully audiences will come and catch us this first run.
I mean, if we had the performance space and the availability, would the Marionettes, do you think, be interested in doing a long run performance? Or is it?
That's interesting, because
Because you can make back your money much more effectively when you've got a long run.
Exactly. I think the trick would be availability of cast members, because everybody does performing arts on the side generally.
Right.
There are very few people I know who try to do this thing
Including you,
full time. Yeah, even I'm doing it on the side. So it's availability of cast members, availability of the space, and what days of the week would you run it? Would you just limit it to weekends, so that you're renting the space by the week, but you're only running for a few nights of the week, and because I remember back when I was growing up, shows used to run for 2 weeks at the Central Bank, sort of like Tuesday to Sunday kind of
Right.
thing. And people would go because there wasn't that much going on. But I find there's so much going on now, so many kind of very, very different things, whether it's theater or music things or...
Sets.
Yeah.
Television special, scandal.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. So there's so much going on that I don't know. I don't know how, at what point the audience would start to taper off. I mean, it would be something fun to experiment with, but I almost feel like with
But
a
you've got all
smaller
the schools
cast.
available, but you said it's kind of PG-13, so that maybe that wouldn't work as
Yes,
well.
and the other thing is even getting members of our cast, because typically when people do those kinds of shows during the day, it's with people who've taken time off from work
Right.
and that sort of thing. So to get the full cast available during the day for the school shows has been a challenge for us.
Yeah, I was thinking the whole casting must be a nightmare, because you've got this huge cast.
Yes.
And it's not like the normal chorale, where if somebody doesn't show up in the back, who cares? Everybody just moves in one space. But you lose a character, so you can't afford to do
Yes,
that.
yes.
Do you have understudies for everybody, or is that
Everybody has an understudy, and we have a few people who are working as swings.
Okay.
So they're kind of we try to.
There'll be no long awkward pauses on stage if anything
Heaven
goes wrong.
forbid, no.
Right.
So no, so we've got every role covered, and we hope that all our principals and key people will be fit and ready to go. The only role we're alternating is Valjean, because it's so vocally demanding, it's so emotionally demanding. So we're gonna try and.
Who will be playing Valjean?
Valjean is Marlon Dubique and Nigel Floyd, so they're alternating.
So
Yeah.
they've both got obviously a level of expertise that they can handle the role.
Yes, absolutely. They're both really experienced in terms of both theatre and opera stuff. And both of them have sung with us for a long time as well, so they kind of know how we work and we know how they work, and we know each other well, and how to try and kind of maximize things. They play the role quite differently, you know, but it's
That's the magic of theatre, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah. So it's lovely, you know, and they're both doing such beautiful work, you know. There have been times in rehearsal where sometimes, because I mean I've loved the music of Les Mis for a long time, and sometimes I'm sitting down in rehearsal and going, I get to kind of bring a musical I really like to life. So that's kind of cool. And then
Just for I Dream the Dream alone, that's well worth it.
I know. And
That's my theme song. Yeah.
Oh, Lord. No, I wonder what my theme song would be. But
You still have a little while to pick before the end of the interview.
I'll try and think about it. But yeah, so, and you know, people are investing so much in their performances, even at the rehearsal level. You know, people are streaming with tears in rehearsals. So
Because it is such a very dramatic production.
It is. It is, and there's such sort of key kind of, I mean, literal life or death moments, you know, or life and death moments.
But that makes it difficult for you as a director, doesn't it? Because it's a very dramatic production, but you don't want it to get sort of like scenery chewing hammy, do you?
No, but I think...
And there is a fine line there between the two.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, you know, one of my favorite quotes is that half directing is casting. And I think we have a really strong cast. And sometimes one of the things that I tell them is go for broke now in rehearsal so we can rein it in and we can kind of pace it and try and find levels and try and find the places where we kind of go for broke, and other times when you can kind of be more still and let the music do the work for you. Because in musicals, a lot of the time, as opposed to straight theatre, where the actor has to kind of inflect and pace and all that kind of stuff. Musicals, a lot of the pacing, a lot of the inflection, a lot of the emotion is built into the music even before you start to interpret it.
So you can sort of draw your cues from the music.
Exactly, you know. So sometimes I just tell them, pay attention to what the libretto is. What are the words? What are you singing? Listen to what the music does. Is it swell? Does it ebb? Does it, you know, is it are there dissonant chords? Is it, you know, is it resolving nicely? What's happening? And you get your cues from that.
Do they say, huh?
No, I think a lot of them are very musical, which is useful. You know, I think virtually every member of the cast, minus two principals, but who still performed with us for Carmen, so they're kind of all marionettes then. And we kind of would like to take for granted the music, the musical, you know.
Music is their life kind of thing.
Yeah, or at least, you know, they have a certain sensibility for music and can respond intuitively to what music is doing, you know, so that they can kind of channel that and bring it to life.
Is the cast sort of volunteering their time, or are people
Yes,
really?
yeah.
Wow.
We're hoping, you know, it would be nice if we got to a place where we could kind of pay everybody for their time, but I'm volunteering my time. Most of the production team, the Marionettes-based production team, like my mom has been doing this for 40 years. She's never been paid a cent. So it's a kind of dying breed, and I think Marionettes is in a place where we're transitioning into trying to figure out how to kind of function like a non-profit organization that can at least pay some sort of honorarium or stipend to the people kind of doing the most amount of work, but it's tricky, you know.
And I know the Marionettes tries to reach the largest audience possible, and therefore ticket prices are never unreasonable.
No, and we have to thank our sponsors for that. I mean,
they're helping subsidize the ticket prices.
Yeah, because
it's only $200 and $250, I think.
Yes, exactly, and
which is $30 US when you think about it, to see a production of Les Mis.
Exactly. You know, we even thought about going up to like $250 and $300, and then we were like, no, we really want to make this something that people can afford, and the subvention from BP really makes a huge difference. If we didn't have that, we probably would not be able to keep ticket prices as affordable as they are.
It says a lot about us as a people, that people will think twice about spending an extra $50 for a theatre ticket.
Locally.
But they'll spend $500, $600, $700, $800, $1,000 to go to a fete.
Completely understand, and that's our pain. You know, it's like you have no idea how much it takes to produce something like this. We've been rehearsing since January, you know, and people commit so much of their time and their energy and their spirits into this thing, and you know, and it's something that we hope will not just be entertaining, but be kind of meaningful for people, you know, because it really is such a life-affirming work, you know, but it is interesting about Trinidad that what we prioritize, even in terms, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about the things that we choose to kind of protest and rise up and demand, and you know, so many scholars have talked about the kind of carnival mentality and how the fetting and the carnival is a kind of release valve, so that our desire to protest and demand and exact change from those in power never actually reaches a critical point unless you threaten us by trying to take away our festivals, you know. But as long as our festivals and fetes are there, then we're fine.
I was talking to somebody from overseas, and they were saying, they were asking what does Chorale represent, and I said, well, apparently it's considered a pressure valve, and people burn off their stress. And they said, what possible stress could you have living in Trinidad that you need to burn off more than somebody in Germany or in New York or places like that?
Yeah.
Who really have serious stress in their lives.
Yeah. Well, I suppose everywhere has their stresses, but I mean, I wouldn't say that Trinidad is. There are amazing, beautiful things about the country that I think keeps us here and keeps us, doing the work here and making lives here. But it doesn't, by any stretch of the imagination, mean that there aren't real stresses. Especially.
Well, I know one of the stresses for directors. That's a segue right there. For directors is keeping discipline in the cast.
Yes.
Have you had a problem with that? Even though I know the Marionettes is a well-disciplined organization, almost paramilitary in its discipline.
I wish that were true, but I think we're really stable and really, and I think that there's certain standards that people know. They understand what's expected of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people don't slip and slide and try and get away with as much as they can.
Show up late for rehearsals.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes they're legitimate reasons. People are coming straight from work, or they have, their babysitters late, or they're in a car accident, or there's a pileup on the highway, or that they're often legitimate reasons.
But having lived in the States, and was it New York? I think you were living.
Yeah, I lived in Massachusetts and in New York.
I mean, if you're an actor in New York, the director doesn't want to hear about there was traffic, there was this, there was not. They just
However,
be there.
What's interesting though is that it really depends on the context, because I mean, if you're working in equity production on Broadway, then too late, two absences or showing up late or tardiness or whatever it is, and you're cut because there's somebody else waiting in line for you. But there's so many, and that was something that I saw and did firsthand in New York. There's so many kind of little hole-in-the-wall theaters, just people just trying to make work very much under very much the same conditions as we do in Trinidad. Stinky rehearsal spaces. You're there with cockroaches and rats, and charging $15
and that's just the audience
a ticket.
Members.
Well, no comment, but yeah.
But that's the wonderful thing about those little sort of hole-in-the-wall productions.
Yes.
They push the envelope sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
Which actually helps theatre in general.
Yeah.
To have that envelope pushed a little further each time.
Absolutely, and it helps, the people that want to be on stage and, don't have their SAG or equity card yet or whatever it is, they can still do work and do work that's meaningful. So,
stay in the craft.
Yes.
I watch way too much stuff about theatre, I swear to God. We have about 4 minutes left. I have to say, I was really impressed. You attended, albeit briefly, the Strasburg School in New York. Did that give you, change you in any ways as a theatre person?
I would.
Given the pedigree, of the place.
Yes. No. I think every place I went, because I think Strasburg and the La Mama ETC Experimental Theatre Company were the two places that I studied in New York, and I think both of them impacted me because they're so different. One is very kind of traditional film TV method. And the other one is very much throw all that out the window and experiment and
Young versus Freud kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say the discipline of Strasburg and how important it was to kind of tune into yourself and be aware of your emotions and sometimes mind your own experiences to bring truth to the role. That was really useful. Sometimes, though, I think what my difficulty was, and this is where sometimes my kind of British orientation kind of fights with my American education a little bit, because the British, to oversimplify it, the British are kind of like outside in, you know what I mean, in terms of take the environmental stimuli, the context, and then kind of build the character from outside in, whereas the method is very much inside out. It's like you start with me, my experiences,
right,
and what this means to me, and then you kind of spill out into, okay, applying that to the context. So I think the one difficulty I had with Strasburg was how sometimes classes could turn into group therapy. And I was like, this is a little intense, and but
what's my motivation?
Yeah, and it was less about kind of, so for example, getting the accent right, locating yourself in the period, asking yourself kind of questions about who the character was, and more about how do I relate to the character. And I think a balance is probably the ideal.
I mean, Helen Mirren does okay, and I don't think she's an
She does brilliantly, yeah.
So,
but she also comes from the British school as well,
Understandably so. She's British.
Yes.
She played the Queen, after all, didn't she?
Yeah, no, I think she's a great balance of the two.
Now, before we run out of time, and I get beaten by you after the interview for not mentioning the details, which frequently happens, let's get it out of the way now before my director yells in my ear. It's from July
13th to
20th, and then to the 20th. It's got 13...
Yeah, 5 shows, the 13th, 17th,
okay,
18th, 19th, and 20th.
Okay,
yeah.
And the admission is $200.
200 general and 250. The Thursday night has a special where all seats are $200.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. And where can people get tickets?
They can get it from the Queen's Hall box office, which opened yesterday, which was Monday, and by calling us at 790-1751 or emailing us at orders@marionetteschorale.com.
And they can get more details from the Marionettes Facebook page, I imagine, as well.
Yes, everything's on Facebook.
It's a good thing we did that because we're completely out of time. I've just been told. So I want to thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to the production myself. Thank you so much.
Looking forward to having you. Great to meet you.
Great pleasure having you. Nice meeting you as well. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.